Give me a 1, 2, 3. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Gilbert Smavey. I'm the Chief Building Official for Mojave County. We're here tonight to have a community meeting regarding the possible adoption of the 2018 International Building Codes. We were directed by the Board of Supervisors to start the process for public hearings and community meetings for the possible adoption of the 2018 codes. It's January 19th, Tuesday, about 6 o'clock at night. Thank you for attending. What are the building codes? Okay. What are the building codes? The county has adopted the international building codes. We used to have the uniform building codes, and then nationally the I codes came into effect about 2000, and the first code in 2003. The current building codes, they specify minimum legal design and construction requirements. They specify structural integrity, specify construction materials, provide fire protection, consistent standards throughout the building industry, safeguard of health, safety, and welfare for building occupants, and are recognized throughout the United States and actually globally. They typically run on a 3-year cycle, so every 3 years the codes are updated by the I code family. And again, we're under the 2012 code currently. Currently the county, Mojave County, is under the 2012 code. We adopted this code by the supervisors approximately May 2015 and became effective for enforcement on June 2015. We actually were on the 2006 code prior to this. The 2009 code came out, and with hard times in construction and the downfall of economy, we did not adopt the 2009 codes. So we actually skipped a code from 2006 to 2012. And again, we're looking to go to the 2018 code. There is a 2015 code that came out, and again, because of just the complexity of going to the next codes and the cost, most jurisdictions skip at least one code. So we're going to go from the 2012 to the 2015. Why should we change codes? Through the adoption of building codes, one, we can achieve lower insurance costs, we can lessen damage from fire and natural disasters, we can avoid criminal and civil lawsuits, and we can ensure the safety of family and business. Another reason for changing codes is typically most jurisdictions stick with the State Fire Marshal's Office for the state of Arizona. The State Fire Marshal's Office has notified people that they are going to the 2018 code within the half of this year. So that's one where all the fire jurisdictions have to be on the same state code and can't lag behind it. If we stay behind on the building codes, there are some conflicts and some confusion between the codes. So again, the 18 code, most all the jurisdictions in Arizona are going to those. We've been notified by the city of Havasu and the city of Kingman. They will be transitioning to the 2018 codes sometime in this year. The Wallapai Nation has, and the Arizona Department of Housing has already adopted the 2018 code. Another reason for going to the codes is the ICC group or the books. We no longer have training or support for that. The ICC chapters no longer provide training. Our inspectors and our plan reviewers are required to have continuing education credits and maintain additional training throughout the year to maintain their certs. And what we found is we can't even test, or actually I don't think we can even buy the 2012 code book anymore. So one reason to go to the 18 codes. During this last year, we've had our inspectors and plan reviewers, we've received, I believe it's 16 additional certifications, higher certifications, and all on the 2018 code. And again, neighboring jurisdictions are going to be adopting the same 2018 code. The benefits of changing the code. We currently are under an ISO, which is an insurance rating system, and one of the components in that system is the building code effectiveness grading schedule. Basically, it grades building departments on what current codes they're under, what enforcement abilities they have, what their certifications and their expertise and their inspectors are, the amount of inspections we do, the type of inspections, the complexity of plan reviews. So that's some of the grading schedule for the building department itself. The BSEG's rating also analyzes property damage and loss, and also impacts insurance costs based on potential loss rates. Another aspect of the ISO rating, besides the BSEGs, is the National Fire Insurance Program, which conducts a community rating system. This rating system actually affects floodplain management, and it provides for discounted premium rates for reduced flood damage and construction for that, for potential damage. In the last year, or in the last 10 years, we received over $7 million in grant funding by having a low CRS rating and a low BSEGs rating, which affects that ISO rating. What's our current ratings? On the BSEGs rating, 1 is the best and 10 is the worst. Mojave County currently has a residential rating of 4 and a commercial rating of 3. We would have a rating of 3 in residential, although the state mandated that jurisdictions in Arizona can't require residential structures to be sprinklered. So by the sprinkler rating, we jumped up one rating from a 3 to a 4. The CRS rating, or the floodplain management rating, is currently a 6. I believe we were just audited by that and received that number. We are yet to be audited for the BSEGs rating, which will happen later this year. If we do not adopt the 2012 codes, the Mojave County BSEGs rating will increase to a 9 for residential and increase to a 9 in commercial. It will also increase 1 rating on the CRS rating for our flood control and our grant funding possibilities. So there's substantial increase if we do not adopt the codes. What is the impact? Without adopting the 18 codes, Mojave County will experience flood insurance increases. 10% for those in the flood zone with flood insurance, 5% for those who have flood insurance outside of a flood zone. And Mojave County will also experience a probable reduction in grant funding, being that our federal funding and our floodplain funding is based on these ratings. When will the change take place? Again, the Board of Supervisors has directed us to start the process of input of community input meetings. With those meetings, we'll be compiling possible amendments and possible likes or dislikes of the code, possible just amendments, and then those comments from the public will be bringing before the Code Advisory Board to a workshop and having a discussion with the public and the board. With that, we'll compile the possible amendments or recommendations from the Building Code Advisory Board and bringing those to the Planning and Zoning Commission for their approval, and then later to the Board of Supervisors for their approval. If adopted, the new codes will take effect sometime in the summer of 2021. And there will be a transition period will be established between the code change from the 2012 to the 2018. Currently, we're getting requests from engineers and designers in regards to some of the larger projects that are a ways out, 3 months, 6 months out of which code should they be on. So we'll have some type of a transition period that will address the current code we're under and the past code we've been on. We want to get into significant changes of the codes, between the difference between the 2012 code and the 2018 code. We've picked out some general, I won't say general, the most significant changes we feel are the changes in the codes. And so this list that you're seeing is not a complete list, but it is the most significant that we see. So for the IBC, or the International Building Code portion, commercial, basically, one was greenhouses are designed to a public display. They will now be a Group M occupancy, which is a mercantile type occupancy. They were in their own category before in the building code, so that kind of changes that to a less restrictive, actually a more restrictive occupancy of a mercantile type occupancy. An example would be your Walmarts, your Kmarts, where they have a greenhouse and open public sales for the plants. Another change in the code was accessory storage spaces. The code changed now to, regardless of size, will be the same occupancy as the main building. Before they had a section in the code for the 2012 that had incidental use areas, and so they had some restrictions on size limits of storage rooms, boiler rooms, stuff like that, that actually had fire ratings and size limitations. And so they kind of simplified it down to some of the storage rooms and some of these incidental use areas are going to be the same occupancy as the main building. Chapter 5 had a change in it. Incidental uses, the table has been refined. They actually spelled out a little bit more of these interesting type uses. I'll just say like a boiler room or an equipment room or something like that, that doesn't really fit the occupancy of the building, say a Kmart or a Walmart would be an M occupancy. And so some of these storage rooms and stuff were being classified as a hazard room and requiring fire separation when it wasn't really required. So they've redid the table and redefined some of those areas and made it a little simpler to follow. Chapter 9, fire protection and life safety systems. Basically, manual fire alarm systems are required for Group A occupancies with an occupancy of 100 or above and are below the level of discharge. So basically, they're requiring a manual fire alarm for assembly occupancies, typically restaurants, and assembly occupancies over 100 occupants load. Chapter 10, means of egress, locking arrangements for educational occupancies. So they changed some of the locking mechanisms and allowed for educational rooms to be modified for security purposes. These are the lockdown facilities that you're seeing now in some of the schools because of the shooting incidents. So they've addressed some of the locks and latches for that. Common used key exception is no longer limited to exterior doors in factory type uses and storage uses. Basically, this was the exception of a locking mechanism that takes special knowledge on how to open. So they've basically made that exception over to interior doors and not just exterior doors. Another change was travel distance has increased in the F1 and the S1 occupancies, so factory uses and storage uses. Typically, there's a travel distance for non-sprinklered buildings. I believe it's 200 feet, and for sprinklered buildings was 300 feet. They've increased the travel distance for both those occupancies. Structural design, wind loading. The terminology has been changed on the wind loading from ultimate to basic, and the wind speed maps have been updated, lowering our wind speed from a 115 to a 95 mile an hour for type 2 structures or resident structures, and then for 90 miles an hour for agricultural or storage type structures. This is a pretty significant change in the engineering designs. We've been told it really affects the steel building manufacturers and industries and can actually lower the construction and design standards for those types of wind loads. Plumbing systems, there was an exception put into this. Businesses less than 75 occupants are not required to provide separate sex restrooms, which were required in the prior code. Chapter 1 and 2 of the IRC. So we're in the IRC residential code now. So that was all the significant changes we saw for the International Building Code, the commercial portion. And now this was the residential IRC section of significant changes. One we saw, or one has been changed, is the maximum height for accessory structures has increased from 3 stories above grade, increased from 2 to 3 stories above grade plane. Another one was accessory structures are now permitted to be unlimited in area. This is fairly substantial, as the last code limited garage structures and storage structures to 3,000 square feet until fire separations were required. So there was some increase in that, and they felt it was unneeded to have fire separation, so they made the accessory structures unlimited in size. Another one was where the IBC permits construction under the IRC. It's now listed in the IRC scope. So thinking of the accessory structures again, the IBC regulated private garages to 3,000 square feet. It was felt that that was a commercial type condition that was put in the IRC to regulate residential type structures. And again, they're trying to separate the residential code from the commercial code. And so this is one section where they did it. And they've cleared the scope, made it clearer in the scope of the residential code to just address the residential. Building planning, sunrooms have been changed. They used to go under a construction standard. Now they're under the standards of really the industry standard. National Sunroom Association has a standard out. So some of these structures didn't meet or wouldn't meet normal building code requirements, being mostly glass and steel structures. So a lot of the industry standards have created their own industry standards for them to follow. Story height of wood and steel framing can't exceed 11 foot 7 inches, and masonry walls are limited at 13.7. This goes into story height with the wall height of 10. It still allows for a 12-foot framed wall and wall bracing for that. So they just really defined more of what the story height is going to be. Exterior walls, they made some changes. They increased or allowed for roof overhangs and projections to go up to 2 feet from property line if the underside of the eave is fire blocked. The last code limited that to 3 feet. Another one was projections not permitted less than 2 feet from property line. Again, the 2012 code limited everything to 3 feet unless you had a complete firewall. Penetrations of exterior walls may not require fire protection unless less than 3 feet from property line. So they redefined that. And the IBC offers additional options and flexibilities in fire resistance of exterior walls. So they made some refinement of definitions in that. Building planning continued. Smoke alarms, basically they've amended to allow battery-operated smoke alarms are permitted for alterations, repairs, and additions. Household fire alarm systems are no longer needed in an approved monitoring station. Monitoring station was brought in for congregate living facilities and some of the facilities you have that are under residential uses, but they're actually more of a commercial use, and they required a fire station and a fire pole station, and now that's no longer required in the code. New provisions address smoke alarms near bathrooms and cooking appliances. That was silent in the last code. And feasibility exemption for interconnection of smoke detectors has been removed. There was an exception in the 2012 code that said if it wasn't feasible to interconnect or interwire the smoke alarms on any room additions or any alterations, that was okay, and the code now has taken that out, so they need to be interconnected. Some people have problems with this, thinking that the wiring sometimes isn't feasible to do, but now they have smart alarms that actually sensor each other, and they don't have to be wired together, but they will go off at the same time, so that it meets the intent of the code. And I think that's why they changed this to have interconnection for all alarms. Carbon monoxide alarms, they're required to be wired to the house with a battery backup now. Exterior work no longer triggers provision in existing buildings. And attached garages require carbon monoxide detectors if there is access to the house. Some past code on that I think the 2003 code required a carbon monoxide detector inside the house if the garage was attached to the house. In the 6 code, they took that out, and now coming back in the 12 code, they're requiring a carbon monoxide detector inside the garage. And it would be interconnected with the house carbon monoxide detector also. Carbon monoxide detectors are also required in bedrooms with fuel-fired appliances in the bedroom or in an adjoining bathroom, and multiple carbon monoxide alarms must be interconnected. Roof access and solar, there's been some changes in the solar energy portion. Roof access and pathways for firefighters are required. This was a pathway around rooftop solar-mounted panels. It was in the fire code, but not in the building code. Some of the fire jurisdictions basically didn't enforce it, didn't want to. We felt it should have been in the building code as we do the plan review at that time, and that's when it really gets caught of having access around the panels for fire and other personnel to access roof stuff on the roof. So again, it was brought into the building code, and it still is in the fire code too. Solar panels near emergency escape and rescue openings. What they're finding out is on 2-story structures where you had a roof below the egress window, those were being covered with solar panels. So if the person in a fire had to get out of that window, they would have to get out the window and step on solar panels. So they've actually required an access space below the emergency egress windows on 2-story structures for residential. Building planning continued. Swimming pools and spas, there was a section, actually two sections in the IRC that addressed spas for barriers and different types of construction and locking mechanisms. In the 812 code, at the very end of the year, not addressed with the 12 codes when they first came out, they created a swimming pool and spa code. We never adopted that, but a lot of the larger jurisdictions did. So there's a whole standalone code book that addresses everything about swimming pools and spas. And so we felt that, or actually they took that out of the IRC and didn't address it since it's its own code now. Chapter 5 deals with floors. There's been a whole provision of Chapter 5 put in for decks. The 2012 code and 15 code were silent on how deck construction was to be done. It kind of put it back to normal framing and construction methods, and it just didn't really fit a lot of cases. So they've actually revamped a whole new section on this. It does address footing sizes, beam sizes and beam spans, types of materials you can use, nailing schedules. So they've actually created a whole section just for decks alone, and it's a pretty good workup. Chapter 6, wall construction, portal frame with hold downs. They've changed this design in the code. This was a prescriptive design for wing walls at garages. And a lot of these walls could be brought down to 16 inches on both sides of the garage door with certain hold downs and certain header capacities. What they had down is they had a 4,200 hold down bracket on both sides of the door, and actually they found out that they can reduce that down to now 3,500 pounds. So that bracket's been reduced in size with pretty much a substantial cost benefit there because those brackets, the 4,200 pound brackets were pretty big and pretty expensive. The other was the portal frame design in the 12 code required 3 bottom plates on that design for those wing walls, and they've eliminated one of those sill plates, and now it's only required to have 2 with offsetting hold downs, anchor bolts, basically. Chapter 10, chimneys and fireplaces. They put in a clause in the 2018 code to have a insulation shield to provide clearance between insulation and the flue pipe. This wasn't spelled out in the 2012 or the 15 code. It was always silent in that area, so they've actually called that out to have a separation of the insulation. And talking with some of the installers, most of the manufacturers for the flue systems are already incorporating this standoff or this insulation barrier in between those already on the pipe. So the industry's already really been doing it. Chapter 11 is the energy code portion of the IRC. We'll get into a little bit more on that on our amendments. One is new in the code is an energy certificate is required to be placed on the wall near a furnace or in a utility room or another approved location in the house. The 2012 code did require an energy tag, and it was basically to call out the R factors of walls, ceilings, the windows, and it was on a little sticker that was to be put in the electrical panel. So the next homeowner or whoever down the road would know what type of energy compliance they had or what type of materials were used to create energy efficiency. So this one's a little bit more, this actually falls in line with more manufactured housing where they do require a certificate or a placard to be put in one of the cupboards or something like that that tells what the climate zone was and tells everything about that unit of how it was built. So this is just a change, and it's just a little bit more clarity of and permanent down the road of telling you how your house was built and what energy requirements were done at that time. When insulation and fenestration criteria, the code has added an alternate prescriptive method utilizing U-factor equivalents. This is something new in the code. We had, in the energy code, we had a table that basically called out prescriptively what your floor insulation should be, what your ceiling insulation should be, and what your wall insulation should be. This one goes a little bit further of all those R factors for the insulation requirements actually have a U factor rating. And so it gave us an additional table in the 2018 code to be able to evaluate are you meeting the minimum prescriptive requirements. And I'll have to steer it to the one table was a prescriptive method. It just told you need R38 in the roof. This other has a U factor rating, which says if you meet that, you can play around with some of the U factors and still get energy compliance at the end. So it's more of a performance type system of utilizing the U factor ratings. And so a lot of the energy designers will use that as there's more flexibility in it. So the code gave you a little bit more flexibility with prescriptive energy requirements. Ceiling and attic spaces, ceiling insulation R values increased from R30 from the 2006 code we were under to R38, which is ceiling. Insulation and fenestration rating requirements, wall insulation R values increased from R13, and again, we were utilizing the 2006 Chapter 11 energy code for residential, and now it's increased from R13 to R20 or R13 plus 5. So if you did a 2x4 wall, you could put R13 bat in it, but you're still going to have an R5 requirement either on the exterior of the structure or furred out on the interior. So it gives you that option to use 2x4 framing still. The code did require decreased window fenestration ratings from a 0.65, and again from the 2006 code, to a 0.32. And I think what you'll find is most of the window dealers are probably close to I'd say close or at a 0.32. I don't think you can find a 6.65 window anymore, since they were really designed about 2006. So we're in 2021. So those are some changes. Chapter 12 and through 23 is mechanical. One change they made was automatic diameters are no longer required for kitchen exhaust systems exceeding a rating of 400 cubic feet per minute. This came into some of the larger homes are having some of the larger and even commercial cooking appliances. So with those high burner and high BTU stoves and ovens, they're having to increase the air exchanges or the air exhaust systems for those. At one time, the 400 CFS was a maximum. Another point was a lot of the appliances were not residentially rated; they were commercial only. So we were having some issues with some of the appliances in the makeup air. So they've actually taken that out, but they've transfer openings are permitted to obtain makeup air from rooms other than the kitchen. So you have other areas that you can take the makeup exhaust air from, and then makeup air for domestic cooking exhaust systems no longer required if all fuel burning appliances in the dwelling have a direct vent or mechanical draft vent system. So a lot of the large ovens and stoves now are having their own intake air that comes into the appliance itself, so you're not having to provide it in the room for that. So the industry's kind of changed that in regards to a lot of the equipment, and this just kind of defines it out a little bit better. Chapter 4 is fuel gas. Electrical bonding of corrugated steel tubing is required. What they found out was the stainless steel tubing for fuel gas, if the tubing was near some metal, say a metal pipe, and the house got struck by lightning and the grounding system was the piping, we were getting static discharge off the steel pipe onto the stainless steel, and it was putting holes in the stainless steel tubing and causing fires. So they traced that down and basically said if you bond the stainless steel tubing to the grounding source, that took that problem away. But that was a pretty big one for fires. Chapter 25 through 33 was plumbing. It actually requires additional protection against physical damage. So the minimum clearance distance for concealed pipes to edge of framing members has been reduced from 1.5 inches to 1.25 inches. That's basically your notching or your 2x4 stud, and you're basically notching into it for tubing or something like that. They've limited that size down from the edge for nail framing, and protection required. And then protection is required for all piping less than 1.25 inches from the edge of the framing member. So those are your nail plates and stuff like that for plumbing and electrical. Chapter 25 through 33, plumbing continued. Hot water heater relief valve discharge. The temperature and pressure relief valve discharge termination pipe must have an air gap. I'm not sure where this happens because most all ours have an air gap. They're in the garage or something, and they're above the floor level. PEX and PERT tubing used for relief discharge piping must be one size larger than the T&P valve discharge outlet. What they found was when you use PEX or the PEX tubing and the fitting actually is smaller than the diameter of the pipe. And when you insert that into the pressure relief valve on the hot water heater, it was restricting the size. So what they found out was if you use one size larger pipe, then the inside diameter of the discharge pipe stays the same. So that's one change. And then termination outlet end of the tubing must be fastened in place. Again, PEX tubing and are flexible, and under pressure they can wobble and move around, so you want that fastened in place. Chapter 34 through 43 is the electrical section. This one, ground fault protection, interruption protection. Code currently requires or will require required in laundry rooms, all outlets in laundry rooms, and dishwasher outlets and lighting outlets in crawl spaces. We've had some different discussions on this one of when we have a laundry room, a small laundry room and a wash tub in that laundry room, a lot of times the only plug in that room is the washer and dryer plug. And what happens is when you have an electrical 220 dryer, it leaves that one double outlet open, and people were using that. And the one code was if the wash tub or any source of water is within 6 feet of that outlet, the electrical outlet, it has to be GFI protected. So they've made some changes in there. They required some additional outlets, and if you have counter space, they require an outlet on counter space, and those are to be GFI protected. Another one was the dishwasher outlets under the sink. Those typically were never GFI outletted, and then they felt basically because of a water source near it, that should be GFI protected also. Another change was any outlet in bathrooms or bath areas within 6 feet of bathtubs or showers. So anything within 6 feet of a water source, they've been consistent from the laundry rooms to the bathrooms now. Appendixes of the IRC, there are several in there. We want to adopt this one, appendix of tiny homes. Again, it's a new appendix Q, and it covers provisions for tiny homes. It defines as a dwelling with a maximum floor area of 400 square feet. Further in my presentation, we have some amendments as the code really has a lot of blank spaces that the jurisdiction puts in for their regulations on tiny homes. So further down my presentation, we'll get into some of those limitations. And I believe that is the end of the significant changes for residential or the IRC code. Next is our proposed amendments for the International Building Code. Let's scoot through some of these. Scope and administration, work exempt from permits. We basically are amending the code for fences and block walls up to 7 feet in height, and then measured from the bottom of the footer to the top of the wall would be exempt from permits. So basically, we did require block walls over 4 feet in height to have a building permit on file, and now the code prescriptively exempts those up to 7 feet in height, and so we felt our amendment should indicate that too. The only exception is manufactured home skirting is not considered fencing, so that would still be a structural item for manufactured homes, which would require a permit. As we go through my amendments here, you'll see the bolding of the code and then just regular lettering. The regular lettering was what we're carrying over from our last code edition, the 2012 codes, and then the bolding is what we're adding or wanting to add as an amendment on top of that. So if we go into expirations, permits can be extended prior to the expiration of 180 days, only once without additional fees. Permits expired less than 1 year may require new permits and half the permit fee, and permits expired more than 1 year will require a full permit fee and new plans. Again, these are carryovers from the 2012 amendments that we made at that time. Same thing with refunds, 80% of the plan review fee will be refunded. Board of Appeals, you'll see this consistently through our amendments as we go through the IBC and the IRC. Board of Appeals, violations, and stop work orders. We already have a section in our building code advisory board and our ordinance, our building ordinance that already addresses a Board of Appeals process through the board, and violations and stop work orders are addressed in our building ordinance. Definitions. This is a carryover from the 2012. We amended the residential aircraft hangar to allow an increase from 2,000 square feet in size to a maximum height of 30 feet from 20 feet. And so that's a carryover from the last one. Same things on occupancy and use for residential aircraft hangar limits. Again, 3,000 square feet and 30 feet in height. General building heights and areas. We want to amend the address identification section in the code, which would require commercial buildings to have 6-inch letters for the addressing instead of 4-inch letters. This was a request by several of the fire districts in our jurisdiction, in such our rural areas that they could see the lettering better on emergencies. Fire protection and life, Group R fire sprinkler systems are optional. Again, this section, residential sprinklers were required in the 2009 code. During the hard times that the state was going through, the state made a state amendment that restricted jurisdictions from requiring single-family residential structures from having fire sprinklers. So again, we've amended this out to say that they're an option in the 2018 code. Fire extinguisher exceptions. We want to make the change of increasing the size of a fire extinguisher one size. It was a 2 A10BC, and we feel it should be a 3 A10BC. And I think you'll see that's pretty consistent within commercial establishments. Chapter 11, accessibility. Again, this is a carryover with an addition to. Basically, it just is the building code should use the most restrictive for accessibility. Arizona state statute has a Disabilities Act that we have to incorporate into our code, and there are some more restrictive requirements in the Arizona code than is in the International Building Code. Interior environment, ventilation. This is a section, I believe, that was a whole house ventilation system and air exchanges for residential structures. And I believe in IBC structures too. We felt this was an option for dwelling units, and actually request that we amend this section to be an option. Appendix J in grading. The building code has a complete section on grading and topography issues. We have Mojave County has adopted their own grading appendix, and basically we'll be using that instead of the appendix in the International Building Code for grading. And that is the proposed amendments for the IBC. So that's all we have for the commercial code. Next will be the International Residential Code, our proposed amendments. Work exempt from permits. Accessory structures under 300 square feet are exempt, and that is with excluding utilities. So that's a carryover from our 2012 codes. Again, fences and block walls up to 7 feet in height will be exempt from building permits, and the measurement is from the bottom of the footer to the top of the wall. And another exception is manufactured home skirting is not considered as fencing. Expirations, this is the same as the IBC. We just carried those over from the 12 code as our expiration of permits in 180 days. Our permits expired less than 1 year will require a new permit and half the permit fee, and permits expired more than 1 year will require full permit fee and new plans to be submitted. Information on construction documents. We're requesting an amendment to require a minimum single-line drawing for plumbing and mechanical plans. Back in the 2012 code, when we adopted that, the Code Advisory Board made an amendment that plumbing and mechanical plans were not going to be required, and one of the reasons was the isometric drawings and the sizing capabilities of manual J calculations for mechanical, and also the I guess we call it the plumbing, gas plumbing and water plumbing minimum size and velocities. So what we found out is we hadn't required those in 5 years. We've had some issues with those in the last couple years of mechanical units getting placed not in good locations. As say if the garage was to be air conditioned and the house was to be air conditioned, we found them breaching the firewall in between the two units. And by the time we catch either the plumbing or the mechanical, we're in the rough in stages, and major changes had to happen to to remedy the situation. I'll take a case where there was a mechanical unit up in the garage rafter framing. By the time we came along on the combo inspection, the unit's already up in the framing system, and it basically was breaching the fire separation between the house, and they couldn't have it up there. They actually had to modify a truss and remove the whole unit. So we wanted, if we could see that on mechanical plans or a plumbing plan, just a single light drawing, we would have caught that. And so there's some cases where we really need that one light drawing just to see where things are located, and so we can not have problems like that at mid-construction. So that's one request we're making. Scope and administration continued. Again, this is a carryover refund, 80% of the permit fee. Standardized plan, we have a complete section in our, there is no standardized plan section in the building code itself. We put this into our building ordinance, which actually gives you a reduction of plan review fee if you build the same structure over and over and have no differences in the structure. So we have a whole section in our building ordinance for that. Here we go, Board of Appeals and violations. Again, we have that already covered in our building ordinance. Building planning, this basically was, there's a chart in the building code that has us call out our geographical area requirements and our design criteria. So this is, the chart's been added in there. We had to add into the table a 95-mile-an-hour wind zone. We're typically in a seismic C zone. So these are all just the design criteria that's inserted into that table. Garage and dwelling separation. The code in the 2006 code required 5/8 type X gypsum drywall between the garage and the livable structure. When the 2009 code came in and required fire sprinklers in the house, they reduced that type of gypsum down to a 1/2 inch. And our last board advisory committee, without sprinklers, amended that back up to the 5/8 type X for separation. And so that's again, that's a carryover from our last code too. Same thing with fire protection for floors. They did 1/2 inch gypsum, and we put it back up to 5/8 because the building isn't sprinklered. Mechanical ventilation, this is one for strictly residential for whole house ventilation and air exchanges required in the house. Typically, these are required under the manual J calculations that are for mechanical systems. You'll see further in my presentation on Chapter 11 for our energy requirements, we're not requiring the blower door testing or the mechanical duct testing or manual J calculations. So it was felt that mechanical ventilations would be an option in this section. Fire sprinklers, again, state mandated, we could not require that, so this is an option. And one and two family dwelling fire systems are an option. Foundations for footings, we put an amendment in, residential detached sheds without utilities can be placed on pressure treated skids and anchored by approved engineering methods. So these are structures that are over 300 square feet in size that have no utilities but are still required to have a permit. And most of these are coming with some type of engineered hold down system, augers, or some type of bolting hold downs to the ground. Here's Chapter 11. This is the energy portion of the IRC. Again, as I stated, we looked at some of the energy requirements. The one was the air leakage test, which is the blower door test. We felt that for our area and currently should be an option and isn't required. Same thing with duct testing. They pressurize the ducting system and mechanical ventilation system, and that's a required inspection in the 2018 code. We feel it should be an option. And then again, manual J calculation or sizing and efficiency ratings for the mechanical systems. If you're not doing the other three, then there's no reason to size the equipment for those tests. So we felt that was an option too. And energy efficiency continued. Pools and spas were in the energy section of the IRC. And again, there is now a standalone complete international swimming and pool spa code that addresses a lot of the pool and spa requirements. Same thing with portable spas and swimming pools for residential spas. Chapter 14, heating and cooling equipment and appliances, locking access port caps. 2009 code I believe required this, or I think the 9 code required this. Basically, on mechanical systems that had Freon systems, people were taking the caps off and sniffing the contents of the Freon for pleasure. And the code councils felt that was a problem, so they required locking ports that only the mechanical contractors could access on those. Again, this is a carryover from our 2012 codes. Our Building Code Advisory Committee didn't feel that that was necessary, and so they deleted that section, and we want to continue that. Chapter 24, Fuel Gas Code, actually fuel gas in the IRC, prohibited locations. Gas piping cannot be installed to a structure that is not attached to a permanent foundation, and we define that as auger type tie downs are not considered a permanent foundation. So let's see, chapter 25 through 33 is plumbing, rough plumbing water test. The 2012 code and the 15 code actually had the water static underground water system on a pressure test of a 10-foot head height. And that static pressure of 10 foot would show minimal leaks in the underground plumbing before it's buried under the slab. The 2018 code reduced that limit down to 5 feet in static head pressure height. We don't feel that's adequate to see the small leaks in that, so we want to amend that back up to 10 feet. Plumbing systems in accessory structures. We want to amend that to say plumbing systems cannot be installed to a structure not attached to a permanent foundation. And again, the definition of auger type hold downs, tie downs are not considered a permanent foundation. Building sewer, this is a carryover from our 2012 code that the sewer line should not be less than 12 inches below grade. Chapters 34 through 43 is electrical. This is a carryover from the 2012, and we want to carry it too, as a licensed contractor is required to install services over 400 amps. Electrical systems and accessory structures. This one, electrical systems cannot be installed in a structure not attached to a permanent foundation. And again, the definition is an auger type hold downs or tie downs are not considered a permanent foundation. Arc fault protection. This section optional. What happens in the 2009 code, they required the whole house to have arc fault protection. Prior code to that was only in bedrooms. And they felt that more of the bedrooms had more cord type appliances than anywhere in the house. But in the 9 code, they increased that to the entire house to have that protection on the breakers. And the Code Advisory Committee advised it back only to the bedrooms only, and that's we want to continue that amendment. Arc fault protection for the whole house, again, we're making that an option if they want to do that. And then tamper resistance receptacles, they were a requirement in the 2009 code. We didn't feel they're necessary, so that section's optional also. Appendixes of the IRC. This is the new one. It was put in the 18 code, and it's basically tiny houses. So it's Appendix Q, tiny houses. And in this code, basically they tried to reduce clearances and requirements of the International Residential Code for single-family residences to accommodate tighter housing and tiny, smaller housing. So some of the values in here were left blank, and it left it up to the jurisdiction to make those decisions. Some of them were put in by the Code Council themselves of having minimum requirements, and then we've also looked at, I believe, Coconino, Pima County, quite a few other jurisdictions that have made these amendments to the tiny house appendix. And this is what we're proposing, is a minimum 6'4" head height for habitable spaces, and that would be hallways, bedrooms, toilet rooms, and kitchens. The current code requires 7 feet. Minimum loft ceiling height of 4 feet. Currently in the code, there's no requirement for any size of head height in a loft. And then obstructions cannot extend below the minimum ceiling height. The code did allow, if you had 7 foot, they would allow, I think it was 4 inches or something for pipes or beams to extend into that minimum ceiling height. In this case, they don't want that at 6'4". Toilet, bath, and shower spaces. The minimum clearance in front of a water closet or the toilet is reduced to 15 inches. The current IRC code requires 24 inches. So they've allowed a little bit of reduction in front of the water closet. Minimum areas, habitable rooms excluding lofts shall have a minimum of 65 square feet. The International Residential Code requires 70 square feet minimum. Minimum dimensions of any room, habitable rooms excluding the lofts shall have a minimum of 6'6" horizontally. Again, the residential code requires 7 feet. So they've reduced the size of the rooms, the height of the rooms, and some of the clearances on the fixtures in order to get a smaller house. Another amendment was that the service conductor for electricity has to serve what the load is of the house, and then any service to that tiny home cannot be less than 60 amps or 3 wires. Most houses are 200 amps and rarely 100, so that's limiting that down. And those are the amendments for the IRC, including the appendixes for the tiny homes. That's our proposals. Now we're going to go into some of the other codes, fire code, plumbing code, mechanical code. So we'll start with the fire code. Group R occupancies, again, this is an option we're putting in the code where it was a requirement under the building code, but again, our state fire code does not require us to allow it. Fire sprinkler exception, again, we raised the size of the fire extinguisher from a 2 A10BC to a 3 A10BC. Sprinkler systems, group A2, 300 occupants or more. This was a section put in that if you had a assembly occupancy that served alcoholic beverages and exceeded over 300 occupants, the building was to be automatically sprinklered. And there's a lot of provisions that allowed the buildings not to be sprinklered or have to have sprinklers. Some of the fire jurisdictions looked at that and said they really don't have a problem with that. When sprinklers are required, it does click in. So they didn't feel that the building had to automatically be sprinklered. There's other ways around that. So we side with that too, and we request delete this section. Special amusement buildings, this would be anything from, probably your basic one would be a haunted house at Halloween. They required that building to be sprinklered. So we don't feel that that's necessary, and so we want to delete that section. And staircases required, this is a section where if you had a 60-foot under construction building, it would require a temporary secondary access of staircasing off the 50 foot of that building until the 60 foot was built or the permanent stairs were put in. So talking with, I believe, Kingman and Havasu, they didn't feel that was a requirement, and we don't rarely get buildings over 40 feet in our jurisdictions, 40 to 50 feet. So we don't feel that would be needed, so we want to delete that section. I believe that's the end of the building or fire code requirements or proposed amendments. Mechanical code proposed amendments are, we have our fee schedule, our violations, and our means of appeal. Again, those are all already covered in our building ordinance. We just want to clarify that as an amendment in the building code. And the refrigerant circuit ports or the locking ports, we want to delete that section. I believe that's the only mechanical proposed amendments. Plumbing proposed amendments, again, we have our fees, our refunds, violations, and a means of appeal. Those are already covered in our building ordinance, and just for clarification. And then sewer depth, this is a carryover from our 2012 code of no less than 12 inches and under finished grade. And so electrical code proposed amendments. A carryover from our last code was a licensed engineered stamp is required for electrical panels 600 amps or above. Arc fault protection in dwelling units, this is an option for the house, but bedrooms will require arc fault protection. Tamper resistant receptacles, we made an option, and tamper resistant receptacles in multifamily dwellings is an option also. And I believe that's the only electrical code amendments we have. Fuel gas code proposed amendments. Again, we have our fees, our refunds, our penalties, and our means of appeals. All these are already addressed under our current building ordinance. Energy code amendments. This is the International Energy Conservation Code. This is a standalone energy book that actually commercial uses and residential uses if they use the performance methods. Again, stating in the IRC or the residential code, there's already a chapter 11 that calls out minimum standards for energy efficiency of R factors for insulation ratings and for window ratings. This code goes a little bit further and goes into a more performance type method of how to gain energy compliance. We feel we don't want to adopt this part for the residential code of the IECC, as we already have Chapter 11 that addresses it, but we do want to amend that we will be using this for commercial, and it's pretty standard. Most commercial applications are utilizing the Energy Conservation Code currently. Fees, stop work orders, and means of appeal. Again, these are already covered in our building ordinance, so we just want to clarify that. Pool and spa code proposed amendments. This is a new standalone pool and spa code. Again, the IRC had sections in it that addressed certain things: barrier heights, pool depths, construction requirements. Now this standalone code basically addresses all those in its own entirety. What you'll see as I go down here is state law also has a pool code, and they did a lot of stuff with barriers and the depth of the pool and locking devices and locking window latches and alarm systems. So we basically, in our past codes, we had to address both those codes, and so we always go by the most restrictive, but it always came down to which code is more restrictive. We're following two codes. So what a lot of jurisdictions and what we're proposing is we're pulling in the state code, the most restrictive, into our ordinance or into this amendment. So you'll have the building code, but it'll also have the state amendment in there that's more restrictive. And so we're just spelling that out a little bit. So violations, penalties, and means of appeal, definitions have changed. Arizona State requires 18 inches. When it's a pool, the pool and spa code requires 24 inches. So the state's a little bit more restrictive on that. Energy, the section on that is deleted. We don't feel that the energy section applies to this. Barrier requirements, basically the International Pool and Spa Code does allow for a motorized cover. State law spells it out a little bit more and requires a key switch and a locking switch in order to utilize that motorized cover. Outdoor barriers and spas, again, state law is a little bit more restrictive with barriers. The pool and spa code only required a five-foot fence, and the state requires a 6-foot fence. So just some changes there to be consistent with the Arizona state law. So heights and barriers and clearances. The state law defined openings and handholds and footholds, saying chain link fences. They address that a little bit more in detail. And gate requirements, double gate requirements, latches, and barriers. So they address the barriers a little bit more restrictive than the regular code. Property maintenance code proposed amendments. Again, fees were already, well, actually, no, the fees were to find out how to do it. We utilize the property maintenance code for dilapidated buildings and dangerous buildings for our dangerous building program. The fees, any fees or any cost by the county to abate one of these structures, we put on as a property lien. So we have to spell that out as an amendment in the code that we're not using criminal. It can be a criminal offense, it can be a civil offense, and actually we're using a property lien method. Weeds in there was a blank. It was for the jurisdiction to put in, so we counted basically 30 inches of weeds. Usually we're going to a vacant property with a dilapidated building or something, and we'll take the weeds with it if they're 30 inches. Same thing with inoperative vehicles. The property maintenance code basically says it's not legal to have any on the premises. We want to make the exception of as allowed in other regulations. Our zoning ordinance does allow outdoor or open lot storage, and so some of the inoperative or unlicensed vehicles could be covered in that and still be under the limits of the state or under the county's requirements. So we wanted to amend that and clarify that. But again, this property maintenance code is we use for basically dangerous buildings and abatement of those. And that concludes my presentation of our amendments, our significant changes, and possible adoption of the 2018 code. If you have any questions, feel free to answer them.
Who actually sits down?
He's got a mic for you.
Who actually sits down and writes up these proposed amendments?
The proposed amendments was our building department,
Your building department?
with looking at other jurisdictions and their proposed amendments also.
Okay, but that's who sat down and wrote up the amendments to now the 2018 code has already been published, right?
It has been
So
published.
we're in the process of how much, or do we want to even adopt the 2018 codes and the proposed amendments at this point?
Correct.
Okay, and when the workshop is going to get is going to convene sometime early February, is that what I heard last time?
I believe it's the first week in the 10th of February.
10th of February.
Yeah. So what we'll have, and I should have gone into it, I thought I did a little bit. What will happen, we have some cards, we have some input that you can give us.
I saw the cards. What I was getting to is the workshop. Who can attend the workshop?
Anybody from all the different, out of our 5 meetings, that's where everybody can get together, and with the board, the Code Advisory Committee.
And how will we be notified as to the location and time that the workshop's going to commence?
I believe we already put out public notification.
You put out public notification? It'll be in the newspaper. So we have to find this in the newspaper? Is there any way that we can give emails to anybody so that I can be notified? So it's going to be here at 1 p.m. on the 10th.
On the 10th of February. And we can actually put that, I believe we can put that on our website, and the cards we have out has our email address to put in any questions or any comments that you have. Those will be all compiled prior to the workshop meeting and brought before the Code Advisory Committee board members.
So I guess what I'm going to ask is, all the questions have to be presented prior to the meeting, or can the questions be brought up during the meeting?
Questions can be brought up during the meeting, yes.
Okay, because a lot of times one question will generate another question.
Correct. So we're not sure how long that meeting will be, but that's the place to bring it up. And that's where the board will have discussion and have recommendations.
And some of this other stuff that I was making notes on, it probably can be hashed out at that workshop deal, and probably wouldn't be appropriate for this time. I still have concerns in regard to the insurance industry and how the adopting of the codes, changes our rating. I actually did a little research on that, looking how that actually gets influenced, and I looked at their rating system and all that. Do we have, we're saying that we'll go from a 6 to a 9 if we don't adopt the 2018 codes, right, for the community. Now, who has that calculation, or how was that calculation arrived at this point?
The director and myself met with an ISO member probably 8 months ago, and that's the number they spit out to us. We also came into the same situation in 2015. That's why we adopted the 2012 code.
Okay, so are those computation, or is that document available for the rest of us to
Well,
look
the
at?
last board in the adoption of the 2015 codes was brought by the director to the Board of Supervisors indicating those numbers. And that's what our direction to the board and the board's direction back to us, in my staff report, those are the numbers we received from ISO.
So how can we get a copy of that, on how the rating was actually achieved? Numerically, how did they come up with it? Because there's a number of factors that go into that. Besides just adopting the codes, there's other community events and other things that happen in order for them to achieve that rating.
Correct. So I'll just say that the BSEGS rating is basically the building code efficiency. And so they look at everything. They look at how much personnel we have, what our certifications are, what current code we're under, how many inspections we do a day, what's the complications of our reviews and our inspections. So there's a whole rating system of just the BSEGs that they come up with that number. Okay, and is that tabulation or document available? I believe through ISO it would be. Through ISO. So what numbers, or how do I approach ISO, which is the Insurance Offices Incorporated? How do I approach them to get that document? I can give you one of the numbers of their board members we met with. Okay, that'd be great. Yeah. Okay, that'd be fine. In fact, I was on their site today. They have a very good website answering a lot of the questions you probably have. Okay, yeah, actually, because
I actually went on a chat session today with FEMA, okay, and asking them the same types of questions, of which they weren't able to give me any answers from the agent that I was talking to. So upon that, they always referred me to the coordinator's manual of 2017 plus the amendments in 2021. And if you open that up, it's a 641-page document.
Wow.
And then you can go ahead and do a search for building codes and find out how it implements, the ratings and such. And I can find some reference in there where they said the use of strong building codes will go ahead and afford you a better rating. But I can't find anything in there yet that says that you have to have adoption of the codes. Basically, if there hasn't been any code changes in regards to that from 2018, from 2012. I am still looking.
Well,
Thank you. If I may address that, in our discussions with ISO, basically what we were told is that if you are outside of, was it 6 years of the current code, if you're 6 years beyond the current code when your BSEG's evaluation is done, basically your rating would go to a 9. So that was the direction, the information that we were given from the ISO officer that we spoke with was just that. It was in a phone call that we spoke to him, but I would assume he was telling us based on his codes or based on his information. And definitely, we can. I believe we've got your information. We can get that information and get it over to you.
I have the report from ISO for the change of the 2012 code, which actually gave those numbers. Okay. Okay, we can get you more information on that. And again, this is probably going to be a discussion at the workshop too.
Right, and I think most of this can be hashed out at the workshop. I understand that these meetings are preliminary, and it's just get everybody exposed. Okay, so I would just look forward to
Okay. So at the direction of the Board of Supervisors, we conducted 5 public meetings. One last week up in Beaver Dam area, one in Colorado City, one in Lake Havasu City, and one in Bullhead, and then our final meeting today in Kingman. With that, we requested, we have a website of any information you want to ask or, have some stuff for us to present, and also compile all this information to bring to the board, to the Building Code Advisory Committee for the workshop. Now, that committee is going to look at different options and amendments and any public comments and have discussion on that. So they're okay. And then once those comments are brought and addressed by the Code Advisory Committee, the Code Advisory Committee will meet and propose amendments and or adoption, and that will be proposed and presented to the Planning and Zoning Committee, and then their recommendations will be given over to the Board of Supervisors. Okay. So like you said, these are really just informative meetings currently, and I do believe a lot more is going to be discussed and looked at the workshop committee. We can get you, we can get you the website. Actually, the website's up on our board right there too, and our little cards we have those on there too.
There's the 2018 code change at mojavecounty.us, and that's the email address. And then the Mojave County website under the building page will be updated from these meetings.
Okay. And that pretty much concludes our presentation today. All right, thank you.
No, I guess you guys can probably guess that I'm basically opposed to 2018.
Mm,